Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, February the 10th, 2025. Today there is a square aspect between Mercury and Uranus, and this is my topic of the day, and I want to look at this aspect and consider what it might mean, what kind of events we might expect, and also I want to look at a few famous people who might be impacted by Mercury square Uranus. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is the chart of today, Monday, February the 10th, as usual, set for noon in New York. And by the way, top right, that is a picture of, that's not the moon, that is Uranus. And we've got the symbols for Mercury and Uranus and the square. Just a reminder that that is the main astrological event of the day. So turning to this chart, at noon, it's interesting, at noon New York time, the moon is all in red, and in a way it shouldn't be. But it is just. I mean, the moon is actually in Cancer, it would seem, at noon New York time. And, that is a reminder that the moon starts today in Cancer and it ends the day in Leo. And at noon, it is on the brink of changing sign. In fact, New York time, the moon changes sign from Cancer into Leo at 1 minute past noon, 1 minute past 12, in sort of early lunchtime. So that's New York. That happens at noon. So if you're in California, the moon moves into Leo at 9 in the morning. If you're in Europe, well, in London it will change sign at 1 minute past 5 in the afternoon. In Paris it will change sign at 1 minute past 6 in the afternoon. And if you're in India, for example, it would change sign, let's get this right, it would change sign at 5.5 hours after 5 minutes past 1, so that would be at about 10:31 p.m. in the evening, at 10:31 in the evening, India time. Of course, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon doesn't change sign until tomorrow. So it is a mixed day. Day starts with the moon in Cancer. Indeed, for many of us, the whole day the moon is going to be in Cancer, and then it moves into Leo. So that is a changeover, moon moving from a water sign to a fire sign. With the moon moving into a fire sign, it starts to, as soon as the moon moves into Leo, it starts making a trine to Venus. So that perhaps creates a little more action, and there's not quite so much water in the sky, because we recently had a moon conjunct Mars in Cancer, but that moon-Mars conjunction is getting pretty wide, and with the moon in Leo, it is different, and many of us can be more positive. Though with the moon moving into Leo, that is a reminder that we're starting the build up to the full moon, because the sun is at 22 Aquarius, and so the moon moving into Leo is starting to make that opposition. I do think this full moon could be quite important because it's linked with Uranus, and we do have planets starting to move towards Uranus. It's not just the Sun, it's also Mercury. In fact, today we have Mercury square Uranus. Mercury square Uranus is an aspect which is quite excitable. There are things going on in our head. We want things to happen, and things can happen, and we maybe shouldn't expect things to turn out quite as expected. And Mercury square Uranus sounds quite cerebral, perhaps what we're saying and what we're thinking. But as we'll see, when I look at Mercury square Uranus in detail at the end of the video, it can coincide with some quite serious accidents and explosions, Mercury square Uranus. So it's not necessarily a trivial aspect, though perhaps we should see Mercury square Uranus as Mercury triggering Uranus. Mercury in itself can't cause big explosions, and so Uranus is perhaps the explosive device, and then Mercury comes along and just sets the whole thing off. So Mercury square Uranus is really the dominant aspect. I mean, there are a few other aspects that one might want to consider, like Mercury decile Neptune. It's a pretty minor aspect. Mercury is 36 degrees from Neptune, approximately a tenth of the circle. So some of us might be looking for something which is beyond our normal bounds, and it can have sort of quite a spiritual dimension, that Mercury decile Neptune. Some people will be more impacted by that aspect than others. If you've got Mercury as your ruler, in other words, if you're a Virgo or a Gemini, you might be more impacted by it than, say, if you're a Capricorn. And so it kind of depends. So that's the broad planetary picture for today, New York. If we reset that for Sydney, sort of noon Sydney time, as a representative of Australasia, the moon is that much earlier in Cancer. The moon is at 21 Cancer. So you can see in that chart that the moon is quite close to a conjunction of Mars. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, your day is possibly going to be more dramatic than if you're in the Americas, because the moon is conjunct Mars, and yes, Mercury is still starting to make an aspect, make that square to Uranus. So there could be more drama with that moon conjunct Mars. If you're in Australasia, moon is not going to go into Leo today. It's very much in Cancer, and Cancer can be a sign which is quite defensive, and moon conjunct Mars can be a very defensive conjunction, so that might be something you experience in Australasia. Turning to the heliocentric picture, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, and I notice that Earth is trine Chiron. Now that trine, it's quite a gentle aspect, and it's not necessarily especially dramatic, though you might say that Jupiter is kind of on the Earth-Chiron midpoint. I mean, Earth trine Chiron is wanting to do things slightly differently. I mean, the Earth is the planet Earth. We're sitting on the Earth. Earth is in Leo, and with that trine to Chiron, we might want to stand out in some way. And with Jupiter, with the Earth making a sextile to Jupiter and the Earth making a trine to Chiron, there might be a certain benevolence to it, and it might be an opportunity to do something worthwhile. There's a certain charitable nature even to that Earth trine Chiron, or maybe that trine is caused by the fact that we are more concerned than usual about other people's suffering. I mean, that's Chiron, the wounded healer. Other people's wounds impact us, and perhaps we've gone through something similar to what we're seeing, and we understand someone's pain. And with that Earth trine Chiron, then there's a reminder that very often, if you want to help another person, if you want to do something which is healing, it's not always easy and it's not always uncontroversial. You may actually have to do something which makes you stand out, and makes you vulnerable to criticism. It can be a sacrifice, and if you want to help, you have to ask what the consequences might be. And now I just want to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, February the 10th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you are kind of moving from one stage to another. The moon has been in Cancer for some time, and the moon has been making a conjunction to Mars, and with this moon conjunct Mars in Cancer, you may have felt that there were things which needed to be protected, and you did want to look after yourself and your own interests, and at the same time your home and your family may have taken up a lot of your time. Now, that just might not be surprising. I mean, it's Monday, you just had a weekend. I don't know what your weekend was like, but perhaps for transition from the weekend to the normal week, the beginning of the working week, I don't know what you're doing, but Monday everything's open, I think, and it's a transition that isn't entirely easy. You feel that you're still stuck in one place and you're not quite ready to make that move, and that's especially going to be the case if you are in Eurasia, Australasia, because the moon is going to be in Cancer for most of the day, perhaps all of the day, and you might just to an extent feel a little bit rooted to the spot, not quite ready to make that move. If you're in the Americas, it is different. At noon New York time, or even 9 o'clock in the morning, Los Angeles time, the moon moves into Leo, and that does change things, and it makes you feel better. You feel more alive, especially as the moon makes a trine to Venus. And moon trine Venus is about you feeling relatively optimistic, able to deal with other people, and you can, to an extent, be a larger than life person. Once that moon moves into Leo. Now, if you're in Europe, it won't be until the late afternoon, early evening that the moon moves into Leo. So if you're in Europe or Africa and you feel the day is having a slow start and you don't know where it's all going, then perhaps you should do something special over this evening when things will be starting to move. And there is the question of other people and your relationship to other people. Your immediate impulse is probably not to get heavily involved with other people and their issues. I mean, why make the effort? But you mustn't underestimate yourself. In your own way, Aries, you are quite charismatic at the moment, and if there's something you want, I think that in most cases you can get it, and it just may be that your attractiveness is obvious, and your verbal skills are good, and you seem very convincing and very appealing, and a couple of people may, for one reason or another, think that you're absolutely wonderful. So maybe you should just take advantage of the situation. Taurus, there is a sense that things are changing a little bit. You've done your best. You've had a lot to think about, a lot to say. I don't know whether you had the chance to say what was on your mind. Maybe not, but hopefully you got your message across. But At some stage, you just might feel that it is time to just slow down. That's not perhaps what you want to hear at the beginning of a week, but as the week progresses, as Monday turns to Tuesday, it just feels like you don't really want to do anything in particular, and you might feel that it's just best to be left to your own devices. And if that's how you feel, then I think you should just follow that through. Things are maybe somewhat complex, and you just need time to work things through in their own way. And so it's just going to be very important, Taurus, that you don't feel pressurized, and don't forget also that at the end of the day, or perhaps into tomorrow, there is an opposition between the moon and Pluto. So the moon does goes into Leo. Goes into Leo. Well, it depends. If you're in California, the moon goes into Leo at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you're in Australasia, it goes into Leo tomorrow. But when the moon does move into Leo, that really does bring you down to earth, and makes you feel that you don't want to take risks, and you also maybe just don't want to say too much. You've said whatever you want to say. If people have understood, that's great. If they haven't understood, well, that's just too bad. And when the moon moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto, and that opposition to Pluto could be more about the end of the day. I don't think that right at the beginning of the day most of us will be particularly aware of that moon opposition Pluto, but it gets stronger as the day progresses. And really, it doesn't matter where you are, even whether the moon is in Cancer or in Leo. The point is, the moon is starting to make that 180-degree aspect to Pluto, and that makes you feel that there are pressures to do things that you don't necessarily want to do. And it might then be the case that you just need space, and you need to kind of go back to your sacred earth and not feel that you have to do what you're told. And I think Taurus, there will be pressure, things that you might feel that you're expected to do, and it's even possible that someone tries to send you off on a guilt trip. If you're not doing it, why aren't you doing it? Are you doing something better? That might be the question. Why aren't you doing it? Yeah, have you really got something better to do? Are your choices about what you want to do better than another person's choices? Of course they're better, but you might be almost gaslit into thinking that you've got to do things in other people's way. But don't be gaslit. Trust your instincts, trust your feelings, and then things should be fine. I mean, you are the most important person, and if you try to do something because you're told to do it, and you don't really know why, you don't know why it has to be done right this minute, if that happens, I don't think that there'll be a satisfactory outcome. So Taurus, use your better judgment, and don't allow yourself to be swayed off the path. Gemini. The big aspect today is a square between Mercury and Uranus. So we've got Mercury in Aquarius making a square to Uranus in Taurus, and this aspect is quite exciting, and it encourages you to think things that you haven't thought about before, and some of these thoughts might be disturbing. Some of these thoughts might be a pointer to the future. I mean, some of these thoughts could be a total distraction. I mean, don't forget, Gemini, that the Sun is conjunct Mercury. Over the weekend, the Sun was exactly conjunct Mercury. And with this Sun-Mercury conjunction, you may not be as objective as you think you are. The Sun can be overwhelming. You might have supposed facts pushed in front of you. Say, look at this, look at that. And you look at these facts and they seem overwhelming. You seem to have to respond to these facts, and what do you do? And you may not know which way to turn. And then Mercury makes a square to Uranus, and Mercury square Uranus can be, again, about something you weren't expecting, and what do you do? So there are a lot of reasons for you to be disturbed and distracted. But that doesn't mean to say that the Mercury square Uranus can't be fortunate. It can be inspiring. But you have to make a special effort to distinguish between the various, the various pieces of information coming your way. What is good for you? What is useful? What is taking you in the right direction? And what is just a plain distraction? That's really hard for Geminis. I don't forget my Sun is in Gemini, so I'm not just dumping a load of problems onto you, but I'm encouraging you to use your mind and really to work out what is important. And how do you decide? One way of deciding might be to think about the future. Think about the future you would like to have, and compare the information coming your way with that future you would like to have, and how does it match? And if you can see the bigger picture and you can contrast what you're hearing with the bigger picture, then you might be in a position to make the right judgment. And so that could be how Mercury square Uranus works. And it's also about dealing with things which are beyond your everyday experience, but again, not being overwhelmed by it. And it's not just the fact that we've got Mercury square Uranus. We also have Mercury decile Neptune. So Mercury is 36 degrees from Neptune, a tenth of a circle, and that decile is arguably quite spiritual. It makes you want to get in touch with something beyond yourself. Deciles are about a struggle to realize an idea or a concept. And so you might have an idea that is spiritual. I mean, it could be something else. It could be artistic and very imaginative. You have the idea. On its own, it just seems unrealistic. It seems like plain fantasy. Yet Mercury decile Neptune is about the struggle to turn fantasy into reality. Now, if we use the word fantasy, we often think about it as a bad word. It's always bad to have fantasies. I don't think that is always the case. If you consider what is possible and you use your intellect, it may be you can work that decile through. So just because you have a fantasy doesn't mean to say that you should just dismiss it out of hand. It could be possible with the right level of concentration and hard work, and of course, concentration and focus, real focus, and not being distracted by everyday facts which might seem important but might not be important at all. And This means, Gemini, that the key thing today is really to decide what matters. Cancer. We are in the run-up to a full moon. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. I think it's on Wednesday. We've got this full moon. It's quite a big deal, this full moon, and many Cancerians, I think, are starting to be impacted by this full moon. And this is especially the case once the moon moves into Leo. So the moon might not move into Leo until tomorrow. Certainly, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but if you're in California, the West Coast, moon moves into Leo at I think 1 minute past 9 in the morning. If you're in New York, it's 1 minute past midday. So that means that certainly if you're an American Cancerian, it is a run up to the full moon, and even if you're in Europe or Africa, you can feel it. It's early evening, or even late afternoon, the run up starts, and that means that you need to start to slow down a bit and consider what is happening, and accept that the lunar cycle is coming to a peak. And with the lunar cycle coming to a peak, then it's a time of awareness where you're starting to understand things. And the process of understanding maybe has been taking place over the weekend, but now as the moon moves into very late Cancer, into Leo, the truth is increasingly in front of you. And sometimes one can reject the truth. One can regard the truth as being, as being optional. But it's always best to be realistic. And this truth could take many forms. I mean, the truth could take a financial form, because moon moving into Leo, the Leo in a Cancerian chart is or very often is connected with money and resources, because it's a sign after Cancer. Cancer is who you are, and the following sign, Leo, is what do you have? What do you have in order to realize who you are? That's the question. And the full moon might really emphasize this. But maybe the full moon is Wednesday. You don't necessarily have to worry about it. And for many Cancerians, the moon will be in your sign all day, or most of the day. Certainly if you're in Australia or New Zealand. And the moon is relatively close to Mars. I mean, wherever you are, the moon is close to Mars. It may be exactly conjunct Mars. It may be 12 degrees from Mars, but one should always think about the planets in the sky. So if you look at the moon right now, and it's not cloudy, you'll probably see that it is quite close to the red dot of Mars, and that conjunction is, I would have said, fairly assertive. It is a time of assertion. It's a time for you to make it clear, what you like, what you don't like, what you want and what you don't want. And it's not a time to be messed around with by other people. I mean, they might try, but I do think, Cancer, that you are able to defend yourself and look after your own best interests. Cancerians usually are, by the way. It is a sign that really knows what needs to be done to protect itself from outside interference. And the moon, actually what's happening with the moon is the moon, it makes that conjunction to Mars. Okay, it might have made that conjunction to Mars over the weekend, but then it moves on to a opposition of Pluto. So you could say that the moon is kind of square the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So if you get that kind of sense of moon aspecting the Mars-Pluto midpoint, then you feel that it's a situation where you want to put dramatic effort into something. Just something matters to you, and it is worth putting a lot of effort into it, a lot of energy into it, and it might almost be quite exhausting, but it might be worth it. And some Cancerians might actually feel that they have to take things almost to the limit and really test it. How far can you take something? And that might relate to the moon opposition Pluto. You have to push things to the limit. You have to see what happens. And once you see what happens, you will be better informed. And there are things going on behind the scenes in the Cancerian world. One of the big aspects today, probably the big aspect, is Mercury square Uranus. Now, Mercury square Uranus doesn't impact you directly. It's not in cardinal signs. If you've got cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, it's not in those signs, the signs which have a direct impact on you. But although it's not in cardinal signs, it does stir things up. And while the Mercury is in Aquarius, Cancerians are really capable of deep thought, and you might be saying something on the surface, but deep down you're thinking something else. And it could be that you notice something, or someone does something, and it's very trivial. It may just be a gesture, but with that gesture, everything is clear. Everything is now demonstrated to you in all its glory, or even in all its horror, and you see it, you get it, and then the process starts, the process of the full moon. And so in a way, the Mercury square Uranus, it kicks off the full moon, and you're starting to become aware of something, maybe about another person, and in a couple of days' time, that awareness will be 100%, and you'll be ready maybe to take some kind of action. Leo, the sun is your ruler, and it is starting to make a square to Uranus. Now, this square to Uranus is not exact until, I think, when is it exact? It's exact tomorrow, Tuesday. But it's close enough. And with the sun square Uranus, there is a feeling that something has to give. Something maybe just isn't working as well as you'd like it to, or you might feel that you have to do something dramatic. And if you don't do something dramatic, then, well, maybe something dramatic is going to happen anyway. And today, in the run-up to the sun making a square to Uranus, we've got Mercury making a square to Uranus. So Mercury making that square to Uranus, and Mercury's conjunct the sun. So you can't expect everything to just run as expected, and you mustn't make assumptions. You could make assumptions. It's easier to make assumptions. You just like things to move in a particular direction, and just let things develop in their own way. But I don't think that is necessarily a choice. What people do, what happens out there, it does matter. It certainly has an impact on you, and it therefore might not be a good idea to make plans which are completely fixed with Mercury square Uranus. And We also have the moon in the process of changing signs. So the moon is in late Cancer, but it is moving into Leo, your sign. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, this is more about tomorrow. The moon moves into Leo tomorrow. But if you're in the Americas, then the moon will be in Leo this morning or early this afternoon. So if you're in New York, moon moves into Leo at 1 minute past midday. If you're in California, or Oregon or British Columbia, it's 1 minute past 9 in the morning. And moon in Leo for you, it's always a good thing. It has to be. Moon moving into your sign, and when it moves into your sign, it will start to make a trine to Venus. Now that moon trine Venus, okay, you might not feel that until tomorrow, but it's still something you're starting to feel. And moon trine Venus is making you more positive, happier, optimistic, and starting to become aware of possibilities, and also aware that you're not going to get everything that you want unless there is first some kind of change. And that might be to do with the fact that Mercury is making a square to Uranus, that the Sun is starting to make a square to Uranus, but also the moon, when it moves into when the moon moves into Leo, it straight away makes an opposition to Pluto. And so moon opposition Pluto across the main axis of your chart, it's about power. Who has the power? And you certainly want the power with moon moving into Leo. But it's the moon moving into Leo, it's not the Sun moving into Leo. And with the moon moving into Leo, there's always a bit of fragility about the moon in Leo, because the moon is a feminine planet. It's sort of passive, and Leo is quite fiery, obviously. It can be overwhelming, and with the moon in Leo moving into Leo opposition Pluto, you respond well to what's happening around you. That's true, but you'd always have to be aware of your limits. You don't want to take things too far too quickly. And it's just because you want to impose your will on the world doesn't necessarily mean you should. And you should consider the things that might be holding you back. And that's Pluto. Moon opposition Pluto might be something that is restricting your freedom of action, or it could be something that you imagine is restricting your freedom of action, because Pluto can play mind games. It can pretend to exist in the outside world when in fact it exists just in your mind. And so don't allow yourself to exaggerate whatever might be holding you back. You could exaggerate it. That is true, and create monsters out of nothing. And instead, you take a sanguine approach. Don't exaggerate, and ask yourself, what is today about? What should today be about? Today should be about, Leo, making things better. The last couple of days, the moon has been in Cancer. Things haven't always been clear. You've had your doubts, and you're aware of areas where you have maybe been short of the mark, where you just haven't been good enough. You haven't had what it takes to see something through, and you are aware of that. And now you have a chance to make up for lost ground. And if there's something you want to be better, there's something you want to improve, then today I'm absolutely confident that you can do it. And you might not believe you can do it, but if you work away on something, with or without other people's help, or with or without other people's attention, you can make solid progress, and you might realize that something that you weren't sure about over the weekend is something you do feel sure about, and you actually feel sure that if you put in the effort, you can really create something of true value. Virgo. Mercury is square Uranus, and for a Virgo, this is an important aspect because obviously Mercury is your ruler, and so with Mercury square Uranus, things are being stirred up. You can feel it, and to begin with, you might not be actually very happy about the situation. You might just feel that you just want everything to be sorted out. You don't want any complications. You want things to be relatively predictable, and then Mercury square Uranus comes along, and it just feels that you potentially have to start again because there's something you hadn't considered, and that might be annoying. What do you do about it? Well, first of all, Virgo, it's important that you don't have fixed views, fixed impressions. Believe that everything is as it is. Everything is straightforward. Everything is predictable. You know all the answers. You can't go into a new week with that kind of approach. Mercury square Uranus is going to stir things up, and that Uranus is in Taurus, and it's about some of your core beliefs and some of your ideas about the world, maybe, and where things are going, and what is right, what is wrong. These kind of things could come along and distract you and force you to question what you're doing. And this questioning process could come from anywhere. It could come from you yourself. Things you knew already, you've known for some time, but perhaps you've been in denial. And then your unconscious mind starts to reveal its contents, and you get it. You don't want to get it, but you do get it, and you then have to start to reconsider. Now, you could just carry on as always, carry on in the same old way, but you wouldn't feel entirely comfortable about it because you know that something is not right. And instead, you can accept the situation, accept that things are not entirely straightforward, and that a change of plan could be in order. And it's not just about the fact that the Mercury is square Uranus, because over the weekend Mercury was conjunct the Sun, and Mercury conjunct the Sun can be a problem because the Mercury is combust. So when Mercury is combust, can't see the wood for the trees. Just so much going on and so many distractions that you don't know what's going on, but you don't know what's happening. And if you try to make decisions, on what basis are those decisions made? The decisions might be made on the basis of erroneous information. So Mercury, if you like, is having just made the Sun, is making a square to Uranus, or in the jargon you could say, well, Mercury is semi-square the Sun-Uranus midpoint. You could say that. And that means, Virgo, that you might have to make a bit of a decision. Are you going to be the recipient of change? Are you going to have to respond to change? And to an extent, I think that is something you will have to do, but there is another path, and that could be being the one who creates change. Mercury, semi-square, the Sun, Uranus midpoint. There is something very original about it. And if you're not happy with the way things are going, then you can insist that things are done differently. And you do it in maybe quite a militant way. You start doing things differently. And you don't care. Maybe people won't be happy about it, but you know deep down how things should be done. And it just may be a time when routines and schedules, which you had taken for granted, other people have taken for granted, need to be just torn up, and you need to start again. And it's a process that could become more intense with the full moon. We do have a full moon coming up, and this full moon is on Wednesday, and the full moon is quite close to Mercury, and so that full moon may really allow you to make those changes. They could be hidden changes, they can be changes out in the open, but it all starts with you, or it should all start with you. And in a way, you might turn out to be an example or a role model. But to begin with, there might be a little bit of opposition. But if you concentrate on what matters, ignore the distractions, then Virgo, I think your next step should be fairly clear. Libra, it's not a bad day, I don't think. I mean, some people might be having a bad day, but I don't think Librans have any reason to have a bad day. I mean, the moon is moving from Cancer to Leo, and from a Libran viewpoint, Cancer and Leo are not necessarily that different. I mean, I know that Cancer and Leo are completely different signs. Cancer's a water sign, Leo is a fire sign. But when the moon moves from Cancer to Leo, it doesn't change your basic stance regarding the world around you. 10th house, Cancer represents the 10th house. Libra represents the 11th house, and we're talking about two fairly high-profile houses, or high-profile signs, where you do get attention. Now, Leo is a little bit less focused than Cancer for you. With the moon, when the moon was in Cancer, it's fairly close to Mars in Cancer. You just feel that there are things you really want to do, things you have to do, and things like direction, status, work could be very important while the moon is in Cancer. But then when the moon moves into Leo, it's more about other people, your social life. And so as the moon moves from Cancer to Leo, there may be a greater emphasis on friends, for example, people your associates, and at the same time, you can think in a more broader way. It's not just about immediately what you're trying to achieve. It's more about the broader sense of where it's all going and where you would like to go. Where you would hope to go with moon moving into Leo. So that changeover is not such a problem. I mean, for other signs that the switch from moon moving from Cancer to Leo might be more difficult. But it is still a time when people do need to be considered. Venus is still very much in Aries, and Venus will be in Aries, for some time. And so, with Venus in Aries, you do have to consider other people, and got to consider the role they have. And when the moon moves into Libra, whether it's this morning or tomorrow, this morning if you're in California, tomorrow if you're in Australasia or Australia, New Zealand, when the moon moves into Leo, it makes a trine to Venus, which I would regard as being pretty helpful, and it allows you to get on with people, to be happy and enjoy their company. I mean, you can do it now, even when the moon is in Cancer. Your social skills are above average, and you are to an extent thinking about community right now. The concept of community and how you are able to get on with people, even if you don't know them very well, even if you don't particularly like them, you still, as a Libran, know that there has to be some kind of communication. And today, Libra, it is a very good day for reaching out. I mean, I know that word, that concept, reaching out, is a horrible, those two words are in a way horrible and overused. But I do mean those two words sincerely, reaching out, because it is something you literally should be doing, because I think you'll be good at it. Someone you're not able to talk to in the past, someone you haven't talked to in the past, someone you wanted to talk to, someone you wanted to be in touch with. Now is the time to do it, and you can do it today. You can do it tomorrow. It might be just best to do it today, but tomorrow is fine. I mean, there is a full moon coming up, and that full moon could create its own complications, but we don't need to worry about that full moon right now, because that full moon isn't until Wednesday. And another thing, Libra, is that the main aspect for the day is really a square between Mercury and Uranus, and this Mercury-Uranus square might be challenging. I mean, I think it's a challenge. It's challenging for everyone, regardless of their sign. But Mercury is about you thinking about what you'd like to do, which is individual. It's not about the collective. It's about you. It's your individual contribution. And it may very well be about your creativity, about Mercury and Aquarius, but it's challenged by Mercury square Uranus. And there is a question about how do you deal with that challenge. Now, Mercury square Uranus might relate to something that is important to you, but you could have your doubts. It just hits you. What is the point? That might be your first impulse. Why am I doing it? What's the point? But go through to the second impulse or the third impulse. And the third impulse, Mercury square Uranus, it should be about looking at whatever you're doing, even if you're doing it really well, and then just realizing that you could be doing it a lot better. And doing something a lot better, it's not just about doing more work. That's not really what it's about. It's about incorporating new things. And Uranus is a dramatic planet which is presenting to you concepts and information which might be challenging, and you don't want to integrate it at first. But if you do integrate these challenging ideas into the creative process, then you'll be doing something really wonderful. You can do something wonderful. It is a challenge, but if you're ready for that challenge and you have an open mind, then I think Uranus can really help you out. Scorpio. At the moment, Scorpio, you are feeling a little bit uncertain of yourself. You're wondering what the next step really should be. I mean, you've got ideas, lots of ideas, and recently, over the last couple of days, many of these ideas, may have been coming thick and fast, and some of these ideas have been problematic, and you weren't sure, whether or not they were actually realistic, but they were still there, and you might have had to grapple with them, and you're still grappling with them, and also you were trying to sort of contrast your need to look after yourself and your need to keep everything together with the challenge of doing things which are new and which are different. And hopefully, Scorpio, you are starting to make some decisions. You're starting to decide what works for you, what can work for you in the future. And with the moon moving into Leo, whenever it happens, might be at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you're in Los Angeles, it could be sometime tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But whenever the moon does move into Leo, that is a chance for you to put theory into practice. You have all these ideas, and now you soon have to make a decision. Which of these ideas are you actually going to put into practice? And the moon in Leo is certainly going to help you. And of course, when the moon moves into Leo, that means that it starts the run up to the full moon which I think is on Wednesday. So moon in Leo, opposition the sun in Aquarius, across an important axis of your chart, because Leo is the highest sign in the chart. If we make Scorpio the first house, then Leo would be the 10th house. And so with the moon moving into Leo, with this full moon in Leo, it's a time when you do have to make decisions, and you realize this, and it is becoming clear in this run up, especially after the moon moves into Leo. And the moment the moon moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto. So what we've had a conjunction to Mars very recently over the weekend. Now we're coming up to the moon opposition Pluto. So we could say that we've got the moon square the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And so you bring the Mars and Pluto together, and it's about you being very determined and being able to concentrate on something that is important to you. Now, if you're going to throw a lot of energy into something, it really matters that you've made the right decisions. You don't want to throw your energy into the wrong things, and that's why the last couple of days have been important. They've allowed you to process things, to consider different possibilities, and now it is starting to become clear as the moon moves into Leo. Now, in terms of relationships, at the moment, you are someone who does get attention. When you're with people, you get noticed, and people are prepared to give you a fair hearing. They want to hear what you've got to say, and when you explain things, you'll be able to do it very well. In fact, you can draw people in. Whatever you're saying, whatever you're trying to articulate, people are drawn in. And you don't have to use bold words. I mean, sometimes using words that are not entirely clear, speaking softly, people want to, what do you hear? What is Scorpio saying? Maybe they want to get closer to what you're saying, so they can really start to understand it, because you do give the impression that you do have something to offer, and so don't doubt yourself in that department, and don't be too bothered by what impact other people can have on you, because if you are worried about what other people might do or say, then you're gonna hold back, and then no one's going to see what you have got to say. So social contacts always involve a certain amount of risk, because you just don't know, do you? Especially like today, we've got Mercury square Uranus, and Mercury square Uranus can be about being distracted by another person's unpredictable behavior. And that's possible, but at the same time, if you hold firm, you keep your cool, and you say what you've got to say, then people are going to listen, and I think many people will actually be quite impressed. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, we have the moon in late Cancer, early Leo. And it is an important sign change, moon moving from Cancer to Leo from a Sagittarian view. With the moon in Cancer over the last couple of days, it maybe hasn't been great, at least in terms of you being a typical Sagittarian. If one takes a sort of textbook Sagittarian, being an extrovert, being out and about, saying what's on your mind, not caring about what people think. If you upset them, so what? That's typical Sagittarian, maybe. But with moon in Cancer, moon moving through Cancer, you have been holding stuff back, and you may have felt that you just weren't quite your normal self. But the moon moving out of Cancer into Leo does create a change, just does make you feel better. It makes you feel that there's less holding you back, and you can be yourself. Though when that sign change happens does depend. That is always the problem of doing these daily charts to sort of my daily readings to people around the world, because it does vary. But moon goes into Leo 9 o'clock, 1 minute past 9 on the west coast in California or Oregon or British Columbia, and then goes into Leo early tomorrow morning. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, probably about, if you're in New Zealand, probably goes into Leo, I don't know, dawn. Maybe I should be able to know that off the top of my head, but it goes. If you're in New Zealand, the moon goes into Leo Tuesday morning at some time, well after dawn. So that does depend. But the point is, the moon is going into Leo in the end at some stage, and when that happens, you're going to be more optimistic. You're going to be more future orientated, and you're going to be able to tune into sort of who you are, what you want, what you'd like to happen. But that doesn't mean to say that while the moon moving through Cancer, things that need to be bad. It's just not exciting. And while the moon is in Cancer, you're more focused on yourself and on your own introspections, and that's always important for a Sagittarian, because Sagittarius is a very positive sign, and one has to ask, where does this positivity come from? And it might well be the case that for many Sagittarians, half the time has to be in the darkness. Now, that might seem an unusual thing to say, and it may contradict your experience, but you have to build yourself up. I mean, it's like Winston Churchill. One thinks of Winston Churchill as a Sagittarian out there, sort of war leader in the Second World War. But I think people also talk about Winston Churchill in terms of his wilderness years. For the 30s, when a lot of it he was being ignored. There are pictures of Winston Churchill making. He was into bricklaying. There's a picture of him laying bricks building some kind of house or a wall. And of course, he was into his painting. And in the 30s, he just wasn't around so much. And that might be the way Sagittarius works. Now, you can be amazed about the energy that a Sagittarian has, but it has to perhaps be built up in the darkness. And on a very micro level, this is perhaps what's happening with the moon in Cancer, and Mars has been in Cancer, is still in Cancer, and will be in Cancer for some time, and then the moon moves out of Cancer into Leo, and it just may be a chance where you can start to use that energy, and it will be an energy which is new, because it's on the basis of your own thoughts and your own introspections and what you've worked out, and so it's not the same old. It's something new, and it's, I would have said, something impressive. And today and tomorrow you can be impressive, and you can bring with you the spirit of the world. You can encapsulate it. Wherever the world is going, whatever the world's aspirations are, you can personify it today and tomorrow. And it's inconceivable almost that people won't notice, and in the end, I think, be quite impressed. Capricorn, you are looking at things in a somewhat unusual way. Capricorns, have a reputation for being, very straightforward and down to earth, but who knows what is going on in the Capricorn's mind? The Capricorn mind, well, like no mind ever stops, but it can always be surprising, to think, what is Capricorn really thinking about? And at the moment, Capricorn, you're able to think about lots of different things, and there's no limit, and you may be thinking about things which might actually be quite shocking. You are aware of the darkness around you, and everything that is going wrong, and everything that is distorting and is twisting, and you can see it, and it's obvious to you, and you're thinking about it, and you may even be talking about it. So if you want to talk about difficult, unpleasant subjects, then now might actually be the time to do it. You just might feel that it's important. Though, Capricorn, do consider other people's reactions. Some people are just not as down to earth as you. You might say things which are real, but might also be quite crude in their own way, and some people might not be able to respond to it. And it's not your fault, but it does matter, Capricorn, that to an extent you take into account other people's sensibilities. And I'm not saying this as a negative, by the way. I'm actually saying it as a positive, because you are able to think about things that just other people can't do. And if you're able to think about things and even talk about things that other people can't deal with, that does give you an advantage, and it makes you better prepared. We are at a time when many people are shockable. Mercury is making a square to Uranus. Sun is making a square to Uranus. Well, Mercury is making a square to Uranus today. Sun makes a square to Uranus tomorrow. And these aspects, they could be shocking. And they represent news that we maybe hadn't been expecting, or a turn of events that completely knocks us off balance. But not you, Capricorn. You can deal with it all. And it's because you're just aware of the way things can go, and you're actually aware of possibilities, good possibilities and indeed bad possibilities as well. So, that means, Capricorn, I think that today you're going to be a difficult person to surprise. I think it's going to be impossible almost to surprise you. And as the day progresses, as you move into tomorrow, as the moon moves into a Leo, you are going to become probably more intense, more serious. Again, I'm not saying this as anything bad. Several commenters have been suggesting that I've been overly negative about Capricorn. When am I going to give Capricorns a break? Well, I don't think I was ever really negative about Capricorn. I'm just trying to take Capricorn seriously. And it is a serious time. It's a serious time for all of us, but it's a particularly serious time for Capricorns, when Capricorns can really get into things deeply. And it is a time when all of us need to get into things deeply, but Capricorns perhaps have that advantage. And with the moon moving into Leo, making an opposition to Pluto, that again, that allows you to move into areas that perhaps other people just can't touch. And again, that gives you an advantage, because you're able to really get to the bottom of things, understand the root causes. And of course, if you understand the root causes, then you're in control. You can address it all. So Capricorn, don't feel I'm being negative. You have possibilities available to you that other people just don't have. Aquarius, things are being stirred up, and it's all down to Uranus. Okay, might be the sun as well, but Uranus today is making a square to Mercury. Tomorrow the sun makes a square to Uranus, and Sun and Mercury are both in your sign. And with Uranus making a square to the Sun and Mercury, things are being stirred up. And you just should not expect everything to run as completely smoothly as you might like them to, because it is a time when there is probably a heightened level of instability. And we can see this perhaps as there's Sun and Mercury in your sign, and that should be very clear. This is who you are. Sun is in Aquarius, Mercury is in Aquarius. You know what you want, and the path ahead should be straightforward. But then Mercury squares Uranus, and then tomorrow Sun squares Uranus, and Uranus represents a tremor, maybe even an earthquake, something happening deep down. It can relate to one's home, it can relate to one's family, but it shakes things up a little. But it's a reality that's always been there. And perhaps, Aquarius, you've been living a little bit too much in your head, and Uranus is a challenge, and Mercury square Uranus is a challenge, is a particular challenge. It's something from the depths, asking you to reconsider. And I'm hoping, Aquarius, that you're able to deal with it in a way. Aquarius, of the three air signs, you could argue that Aquarius is the most earthy of the three air signs. Maybe because Aquarius is fixed, and if you're earthy, you need to make sure that everything is well established, that it's all established on stable ground. And if something is established on unstable ground, you need to make an allowance for it. And that might be what you learn with Mercury square Uranus today. And you do have to think for yourself. Mercury is conjunct to Sun. I mean, Mercury was exactly conjunct the Sun over the weekend. That conjunction is still there, and Mercury conjunct the Sun might be that another person or a group of people are playing up. They're doing things that you hadn't fully taken into account, you hadn't expected, and you have to kind of you have to make an allowance. You have to go with the flow. Understand where they're at, and also understand the possibility of threats. I mean, not threats like physical threats, but threats like you have to consider, what can people do? What can people do to mess you up? It might just be simply about changing their plans or just doing something completely unexpected. And yes, it can happen. And one often thinks that Aquarius is quite a revolutionary sign, that Aquarius kind of likes the unexpected, but Aquarius is a fixed sign and it's ruled by Saturn, and I don't think you want to have too many shocks, and you just have to bear in mind that other people might not be quite as predictable as you'd like them to. And when we look at the moon, we can see that the moon is starting to move into Leo, and whether it happens at 9 o'clock in the morning or 1 minute past 9 in the morning in California, or tomorrow morning if you're in Australia or New Zealand, whenever it happens, the moon is moving into Leo, and Leo is your opposite sign. And when the moon moves into Leo, what that means is we have the run up to the full moon. We have a full moon coming up on the 12th, which is a Wednesday, and that full moon has a direct impact on you. Moon will be in Leo, Sun will be in Aquarius. That's the definition of a full moon opposition. And so, moon moving to Leo, you've got to be especially aware of the impact that outside events can have on you, and you have to get the right perspective. Is it about something from the outside going out of its way to mess you up or forcing you to change your plans? And that all seems very unfair. Or is it something in you that's almost creating a situation because you know that things as they stand could be better and you want change? And that might be how the full moon actually works. And it's very important with that full moon to take responsibility for it. And with this full moon, you're sort of fast moving to a stage where you can see things. You can see things. There's a possibility of seeing things. Now you might ignore that, but ideally you're going to have your eyes open. So Aquarius, I would just suggest that you start preparing for this full moon. You're starting to feel it. The moon is moving into Leo. Just get ready for it, and just don't feel that the way things are right now is going to last forever. And you can see the change. You can see the beginnings of the change. I mean, I say you can see. It doesn't mean you do see. But if you open your eyes, you can see the way things are going, and be future orientated. And that's what Aquarians are supposed to be. It's seen as being a future orientated sign, a sign that is realistic about the future, and that in many ways can see the future. And so that's something you have. That's an advantage you have. So it's important that Aquarius, you're able to make the most of it. Pisces, you are in a state where you feel that you're not really sure what's happening. You know that there's some basic responsibility here. You can feel it. I mean, you can feel what's going on, but you don't necessarily know what's going on. You get this sense of connection with the world. That's true. But also, you can't verbalize it. But maybe you just shouldn't verbalize it right now. You should just accept that, you can be an actor. You can be a channel for whatever is supposed to be happening next. That can all happen, and it might be about just waiting, and you wait and see, and as things change, you change, and as things change, you decide what role you have to play. So in that sense, Pisces, it's a time when you probably should have an open mind. And as far as the main aspect today is almost certainly a square between Mercury and Uranus. And Mercury square Uranus might well be about other people and how they treat you and how they behave, and also how you respond to them. And so Mercury square Uranus it's an exciting aspect, but it's not particularly stable, and it may say something about other people's behavior and how you respond to their behavior. And so, don't be surprised if people do things that frankly you just weren't expecting, and don't allow it to upset your equilibrium. People are a law unto themselves, and getting involved with other people is always a risk. Always a risk. People are not automatons. They don't run according to a script which you have provided them with. They are, to an extent, free actors. At least in theory they're free actors. Or even if they're not free actors, they are behaving because they're being manipulated by some wider cosmic puppet master that you don't really understand. But it's still there, something pulling the strings, and you're surprised at the way the puppets move. And it's a multi-dimensional puppet show that you're watching, and things can happen, and you must be ready for it. And of course, you're not a puppet. I don't think in this case you are. I think you're aware of the way things are going, but I don't think necessarily in a verbal sense. And of course, we've got a full moon coming up. We've got the build up to the full moon moving into Leo. Could be today, could be tomorrow when the moon moves into Leo. And of course, when the moon moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to the sun. I mean, I don't want to really talk much about that full moon now, because when the full moon is on Wednesday, so I'll be talking about how that full moon is going to impact the 12 signs. But with that full moon, though, you just have to be aware that that things are unpredictable, and when things are unpredictable, you have to make sure that you have the ability to move with the times. As things change, you change, but you don't actually change anything fundamental, and that, in many respects, is the key to being a Piscean, or at least the key to being a successful Piscean. And now it's time to look at things from a viewpoint of the I Ching. And I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 47, which is oppression. This hexagram probably comes up more than anything else. I don't know, just my subjective view. Maybe I'm just fooling myself, but this oppression comes up. This hexagram 47 does come up a lot, and it's about something being difficult and being a little bit overwhelmed, and just perhaps feeling that we haven't got enough energy to see it all through. And it can be exhausting. And the symbol of the symbol of this hexagram is a lake with a hole in it. The lake losing its fundamental energy, losing its contents, and that energy, that water, where is it going? And so that is a little bit oppressive. But that doesn't mean to say we're going to fail. In fact, oppression is not about failure, it's about success. And that success comes about through the ability to take responsibility and knowing when to take responsibility. And obviously we can't take on too much, but we have to take on as much as we can. And we have to get the timing right, and we have to have the appropriate attitude. And with this hexagram, we do have 3 moving lines. Bottom line moves, second line from a bottom moves, and the third line moves. And the bottom line moving could represent our first impulse being to feel sorry for ourselves. We believe that there is really nothing we can do. And this line, the symbol of this line could be us just feeling sorry for ourselves, just sitting under a tree, feeling sorry for ourselves, and we're not going to do anything. And the I Ching warns us that if we sit on, we could be here for 3 years. We're not going to be here for 3 years, because this is just a reading for one day. Maybe we should see it as 3 hours, because it's a daily reading. So there could be a period where we just feel sorry for ourselves. We don't know what to do. We don't do anything. We think we regard the whole situation as being hopeless. And as the day progresses, we do move beyond this feeling. We feel that we feel a little more positive, but somewhat world weary. We've been in this world for long enough, and the world is just getting us down a bit. But it does appear that help is at hand, and if we do make a little bit of an effort, then we may get some feedback from the universe, and that creates a possibility of progress, but only up to a point, because then the third line moves, and then the third line is all about, we're restless, we're indecisive, we want something to happen, but are we going to be able to do it? We kind of know we probably could do it, but we don't want to do it, and it's all about taking responsibility. And the best thing to do would just be to take responsibility right from the beginning, just to say to ourselves, the situation is really difficult, but we can't just not do anything. We have to do something. And by doing something, you're creating a lot of possibilities, even if you don't feel particularly positive about it. And with these 3 moving lines, that does mean we move to a separate hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 13, which is fellowship with men. Or I think we should say, that's what the Wilhelm I Ching translates it as. I think I would probably easier to say fellowship with people in general. I don't think we need to have a gendered title for this hexagram. So fellowship with other people is probably a better way of seeing it. Though you always have to consider the literal possibility here. Fellowship with men, maybe it is with men. Maybe a man might provide the answer. But then on the other hand, there is no hexagram in the I Ching called in the Wilhelm translation with fellowship with women. It doesn't have that. So because of that, I think that it is perhaps inappropriate to get too hung up on the word men. Well, words do matter with the I Ching. Every word matters. And so, you have to be careful about changing words. But I think fellowship with other people would be more appropriate. And so what this is saying is that the day starts as being quite difficult. We do feel we have to take on a lot of responsibility, and we might to begin with feel that there's absolutely no help available. But in the end, if we keep doing it, we keep working, maybe it's through gritted teeth, but if we keep ploughing on, then help will be available. And if we have a positive approach, the first line of the previous hexagram, sitting under a tree, just not feeling there's any point in doing anything. But if instead we were to reach out to people, we're to try and get other people's help, then I do think that help will be available. And that does mean that the day should end on quite a satisfactory note, especially if we are able to enlist outside support. And now I want to finish up by looking at this aspect between Mercury and Uranus. And here's a chart for the Mercury-Uranus square, and it's there it is. So Mercury at where is Mercury gone? Mercury is at 2319 Aquarius, and it is square Uranus, which is at 2319 Taurus. And this aspect happens today at 7:28 p.m. London time. So early evening in London, which would be late morning, afternoon if you're in the Americas. Early mid-evening if you're in Europe, tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Kamchatka. And this is a precise moment, but there is an orb, and this aspect between Mercury and Uranus has been getting more and more exact over the last couple of days. Now it is exact. It will last for a couple more days. And in a way, it's not just about Mercury square Uranus. We have to remember that the Sun is square Uranus as well. So what we could say is actually Sun and Mercury are both square Uranus, and that means that in a way the Sun and Mercury are acting as triggers. Uranus is could be seen as an explosive charge, and Mercury and Uranus, Sun and Mercury, prove their squares with Uranus, are acting as a trigger. And as far as how we might understand the day, I think this has been pretty clear in what I've said in this video so far. I don't think I need to spend too much time repeating myself, but it could be a day when things happen, when there could be some unexpected events, unexpected news. And additionally, we should think about our own mind and how we are processing information, because we might have a realization and it might feel incredibly significant. And we might not want to change things, but this Mercury square Uranus, it is in fixed signs. And so fixed signs, in a way, fixed signs are quite rebellious, but they're quite resistant to change at the same time. So there's a certain irony there, or not an irony, a certain contradiction with this aspect that is about change, but is also about fixity. And it just may be with this Mercury square Uranus, it's not about things bending, it's about things breaking. We can deal with so much change and we just let it wash over ourselves, we ignore it, and then suddenly we snap and we realize, hey, something's happened, something has shifted, something is shifting. And so it is challenging, but it can be enlightening, provided we are sufficiently open-minded. And to get an idea of Mercury square Uranus in its different forms, I thought it'd be a good idea to look at four events that took place when Mercury was square Uranus. So the first event took place on April 19th, 1906, and this is when Pierre Curie, who was the husband of Madame Curie, the discoverer of radium, and they both discovered radium, and they were both Nobel Prize winners. He had an accident. He died. He was crossing the street, and I think he was knocked over, and a carriage hit his head and he died. And this is the chart for when this happened. And there's Mercury and there's Uranus. So Mercury and Uranus, they're about a degree apart. This is when it happened. I think this is the right time. And if I've got the right time, Mercury's in the 8th house in Aries. 8th house, Aries, hitting your head. Aries rules the head. Mercury square Uranus. And so, there was the accident. And in fact, Mercury was square Neptune. So Mercury was square Neptune, square Uranus. Mercury was on the Uranus-Neptune T. So Uranus-Neptune, Uranus-Neptune is about elimination of a waking consciousness, or perhaps someone not paying attention as they're crossing the road because they're thinking about something else. And I suppose Pierre Curie, super intelligent person, he probably was, I don't know, thinking about something else. I don't know. And you might then ask, well, so what? People have accidents all the time. But this was the death of someone important, a Nobel Prize winner, the discoverer of radium. No one trivial. This was an important death, a tragic event, which would have caught the world news, and people still know about it. And so that is one way in which Mercury square Uranus can manifest. It's news about a death, and it may say something about the event. What he was, I don't know, we don't know what he was thinking about. Maybe this chart does tell us a little bit more about the event. But so that's one thing that could happen with Mercury square Uranus. So if you're crossing roads with Mercury square Uranus, be extra careful. Don't be distracted. Don't just look at your phone. Whatever you do when you're crossing the road, you see people, with their phones and headphones, and they've kind of closed themselves down sensorily, but they're still walking around and walking in traffic, maybe. So that is a manifestation of Mercury square Uranus, and an even bigger death. I mean, a death that really caught everyone's attention. And again, Mercury square Uranus is the news, and it's the assassination of Kennedy, with Mercury and Sagittarius square Uranus very, very closely with 4 arc minutes. So I don't want to talk about that chart. The point is, it's about news. Regardless of the death, news. It was an incredible piece of, obviously a very tragic piece of news, but it was a piece of news that went around all the world, and all this idea about people remembering it, and so that is a manifestation of Mercury square Uranus, and Mercury square Uranus can be about people making mistakes and perhaps not making enough effort to secure something's safety. And the Bayesian, you remember the Bayesian last year, that was this ship moored outside Sicily, and it was, this sort of super yacht, and there was sort of very rich people aboard, and it was moored outside Sicily, and there was a weather event, and it just got wiped out, and there's these pictures of this ship just being overwhelmed by the weather, and maybe some doors weren't properly closed, or anyway it went down very quickly and people died. And this happened with Mercury square Uranus, and a very relatively close square Uranus. Uranus was within certainly less than a degree. Okay, it might not have been angular, but I would have said that Mercury square Uranus kind of describes the event, and it was certainly newsworthy. And then another event which was very explosive was the Messine mine. So this was the event during the First World War, when miners, I think they were British and Commonwealth miners, they dug a tunnel underneath the German lines, and they put huge amounts of explosives underneath a German bunker or position, and then they exploded it, and I think 10,000 people might have been killed. I mean, this is the most people killed in a single non-nuclear explosion ever. And so it's fitting that Mercury was square Uranus. So, there's Mercury in Taurus. Mercury in Taurus, that would be Mercury, Mars in Taurus going underground. There's Taurus, the ground. And look at this chart. Pluto was exactly on the IC at the time of this explosion. And it was in Ypres in Belgium, and Moon was opposition Pluto, and Mercury square Uranus. Mercury was in a way acting as a trigger. Uranus was the explosion. Sorry, Uranus was the explosive charges. It wasn't just one charge, it was several charges, and I think they were all blown up together. And Mercury was the trigger. So you can see that Mercury square Uranus is about news, and it can be about explosive events, and it can be about carelessness. Pierre Curie crossing the road and getting knocked over, or we don't know what happened with the Bayesian. At least I don't know what happened with the Bayesian. Maybe something wasn't tied down as much as it should be, or so that's extreme. Those four events are fairly extreme, but those might be the kind of things we might want to be looking out for with Mercury square Uranus. And it could be about some kind of news which is slightly shocking over the next couple of days, and especially as it's not just Mercury square Uranus on its own. I mean, the Sun is making a square to Uranus as well, and finally, I just wanted to go over some people who might be impacted by Mercury square Uranus, people who've got stuff at 23 degrees Taurus. I'm kind of repeating myself because I have talked about these famous people before, because I mentioned them when Uranus was stationing, because Uranus stationed at 23 Taurus. So I mentioned all these people who might be impacted by the Uranus station. And so Mercury's come along and hit that same position. So forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but the people I want to talk, this is going to be very quick. Nancy Pelosi, she's got her midheaven at 22-25 Taurus. So what's happening with Nancy Pelosi is she's got Uranus on her midheaven, and Mercury is squaring it. So Mercury, again, is like the detonator. It's a trigger for something going on in terms of what she's doing, how she's proceeding with her political career or not proceeding with her political career. And it's probably somewhat challenging for her, given what we know already after the Democrats' massive defeat in November. And on the other side of the political spectrum, there is Donald, and he has got his midheaven at 24-22 Taurus. So he has Uranus on his midheaven, and he has Mercury square his midheaven. The thing is that Donald's always doing stuff, isn't he? I mean, Trump is just always doing something newsworthy, talking about tariffs. And so it's going to be very difficult to distinguish between these various events, and which is a Mercury square Uranus event, when there's news every day in terms of Trump's actions, behavior. But it just might be that this is, in general, he's got Uranus on his midheaven, so it's kind of not surprising how active he is. And just maybe with Mercury square Uranus, that he does something which is extra newsworthy. So that is a possibility. Although it could be something that happens to him. So he shouldn't be blasé. If I was advising Trump, I'd tell him about this. What are you doing over the next couple of days? Are you doing anything that is maybe a little bit unwise? And then Harry and Meghan, I just had a video on Meghan. I looked at the comments. Very mixed views. A lot of you don't want to hear any more about Meghan. And even a suggestion that I'm obsessed about Meghan. I'm not obsessed about Meghan. I'm obsessed about Meghan's chart. I am. And I'm obsessed about Meghan's behaviour, because I find Meghan an extraordinary person. Because her behaviour is so out of my experience, and I don't understand how someone can behave in the way she does behave. So that's why I look at her chart quite a lot. And I always think it's actually really good to take one person to really get into their chart in detail. But I don't want to. I don't want to look at her chart. I instead want to look at the chart of her marriage with her marriage with Harry. So, just to point out that the midheaven in the marriage chart has 23 degrees 38 Taurus. So it's got Uranus is on the marriage chart's midheaven, and Mercury is square that midheaven, and so that suggests extra pressure. What could be providing that pressure? Because the midheaven is about how the marriage is seen in public. I mean, most marriages are not public events, but with Meghan and Harry, it is a public event. And so with Uranus, the marriage has a public profile. And it's especially public at the moment because you've got the Invictus Games. And so the Invictus Games, they started on Saturday, I think at 1 o'clock in Whistler in British Columbia. So, I mean, this is a chart for the Invictus Games. I mean, not an entirely bad chart. I mean, Moon in Cancer on the ascendant with square Venus. I don't actually think that's such a bad chart for these games in terms of profile and so on. And we shouldn't forget that in terms of Harry, things may well improve for him quite soon. There's something big going on in his Vedic chart because his Jupiter Dasha is about to start very soon, and that's something I do want to look at in detail. What can go well for Harry? We'll see. We'll have to be looking at that. But in terms of the Invictus Games and comparing it to the marriage, and of course the Invictus Games happens just before Mercury goes square. Mercury's before Mercury's square Uranus, but okay, there we have the you see. So Uranus was at 2318 when it makes that square to Mercury, and so it's right on the midheaven of the marriage chart. And of course, Pluto has already crossed the conjunction of Mars. So we'll see. We'll see. But I think that Uranus is putting more pressure on the marriage, or maybe it's just putting pressure on the public profile of that marriage. And finally, a reminder that King Charles has his Sun at 2225 Scorpio, and so Uranus. But he does at the moment have Sun square his Sun. He's got Uranus opposition his Sun, so Mercury square his Sun at the same time as Uranus is opposition his Sun. That does put pressure on him. So it is a difficult time for him. And look at his his fifth house cusp. His IC is at 13 Libra, but his Sun 2255, maybe it's about his relationship to his children, perhaps his relationship to Harry, but anyway, his Uranus is putting a lot of pressure on his Sun, and so there may be something going on for King Charles, but we may never know about it because if it's negative, you know, these things tend to be kept secret. So that's Mercury square Uranus. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. I've just hit 9,000 subscribers, so thank you very much. If you have subscribed, I really do appreciate this. I don't know what 9,000 subscribers means, but it seems better than nothing, and I suppose my next target is 10,000. But yes, if you're not subscribed, I would be very grateful if you were to become a subscriber. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.